Hello everybody, this is Simon with Let's Play Sonic 2006. Sonic games tend to be very different from each other, but there is one pretty firm structural constant in the adventure era. You have to beat all the different stories they offer, then this unlocks a final sequence of levels, and only then do you get to fight the big bad climactic final boss, and it is awful, just complete dogshit every time without fail. They abandoned the multiple story structure with Unleashed after this, but that other tradition almost universally upheld. Even my personal favorite Generations has such a bad final boss that it drags the whole wonderful game down. So, is Solaris really bad? Oh, absolutely. Is it bad for a final boss because it is in 06? Actually, not really. For a Sonic final boss, this thing is almost tolerable. It has two main flaws. The first is actually an 06 exclusive. Silver has to pick up projectiles and throw them back, and we know how well that works from the Iblis fights. The second is part of the tradition. It is utterly unclear what you have to do. All of these final fights suffer from major conveyance issues because you're suddenly thrust into an entirely new control scheme. 06 isn't even that bad about this, because each character's super form is reasonably close to their normal one. Sonic attacks enemies directly, homing or bounce, Shadow builds his gauge, then uses chaos powers, and Silver picks up projectiles and flings them back. Really, 06 almost sticks the landing. It even has a pretty clear tutorial on how everything works. It spells out how the controls work. After you die once, your first try, which is what I'm partially emulating at the moment, will be spent in helpless confusion as you keep cycling through your hedgehogs, the one thing the game deigns to tell you, and fail to do much damage. Actually, even the switching mechanic is pretty well done, all things considered. Every time you spend time with one of the other hedgehogs, the rings of the other ones regenerate in the background. The longer you survive hits with one of them, the more rings the others get back. That means that if you switch at a reasonably constant pace, not too often, then you are in no big danger of dying. Which is great, because a huge problem many of these fights always had, like for example the one in Shadow the Hedgehog and the one in Heroes, is that at some point you just run out of rings and you can't really do anything about that because the ring refill mechanic is disgustingly random. This one here is completely controlled, it works extremely well, so I actually really like it. The other problem is of course figuring out what to do, though I would posit that generally it's fine, because you can see at some point, if you try out all of the hedgehogs, that Silver does damage, and then this happens. The arm that Solaris used for blocking shatters, the armor is gone, and now you can try and do other stuff and try to attack with the other hedgehogs. And now, a really big problem comes in. You see Shadow's gauge increasing, which allows him to now damage Solaris, which is what you have to do for the second part of this. Well, you can only increase this gauge if you press the trigger, which is nothing like it has ever been in the game, completely negating my previous statement that this is basically what you've been doing all the time, you know? And that is a huge issue, because how would you know this? This is where, when I first tried the fight, I was like, what do I do? How do I progress? And there is no way to find that out unless, again, you die and wait for the game to tell you, which is dumb. It's really stupid. Now that I know how it works, it's not actually that bad, you know? You first go to Silver, take out the armor of one arm. Then you go to Shadow, take the armor out of another arm. Make sure you don't die in between, so switch when you're going low. And now, obviously, it's Sonic's turn. And this is something which I actually found out while recording. Sonic can also charge his gauge, which is not something that the game ever told you about. And if you do that, then you even get an extra special move for him as well. There is a difference to Shadow, however, because Shadow can shoot rapid-fire chaos spears without charging, but that doesn't do anything, ever. It's a completely useless move, which is really weird, but yeah, that's just the way it is. Something else I'm showing off here, that yes, you can't actually hit Solaris with the other hedgehogs here, but I'm just like trying basically because I have to wait for Sonic's rings to regenerate. But this is basically the first phase of this fight. I have figured it out. you can slowly fly with Sonic towards Solaris and bonk him, like so, deals a huge amount of damage, and you run the risk, however, of getting projectiles in your face, because those are pretty random. It's hard to control that. It's not the greatest fight, as I've already said, but it's at least somewhat consistent. However, what you also can do, and this is I'm going to show off in a bit because I just didn't know about it before, you can charge Sonic's gauge full or even half full and then do a much quicker attack which has barely any risk of you getting hit by projectiles. So that's nice. Something I also appreciate about this fight, while we are praising it, is the visual language is relatively consistent. Every time you see a blue shield pop up in front of Solaris, like so, like these blue concentric rings, this means that it is invincible. You can't hit it like so. Anytime you see the health bar go down, then of course it takes damage, duh, yeah, but the blue shield is rather clear about things. And now I make a crucial mistake. I didn't wait long enough and Sonic is actually pretty low, and I realized it a little bit too late. However, this is also where I realized that you can charge the gauge and go in like this, which is pretty good, which makes me greedy. But as I said, this is a little bit too late. I did destroy the central armor, which is good, which also means that now all of the hedgehogs can hit him. However, I get hit just before I switch. I did press the button, you can hear it from the dialogue, but now listen to this. Interesting, didn't know that. Oh, there it is. Use the trigger to use your super gauge. I mean, to charge the super gauge, they should have said, but you know how it is. And this is exactly the only thing you really need to know. Anyway, as I said, I didn't switch fast enough last time, which got me killed, but now I know exactly what to do, so this is the efficient way to fight him. Go to Silver, break the arm, break the first armor, go to Shadow, break the other armor, and so on. This is pretty much the only time you have to use Silver, which is good because, you know, he's awful in this sense. It's just really annoying to throw these projectiles back. At least Solaris's hitbox is a lot more generous than Iblis's is, but you still have the big issue that the projectiles can impact each other, and yeah. And when you are shooting them whilst some of them are flying towards you, they can cancel each other out, so that's a bit of an issue. But it's not that big of a deal. Like, we've had worse, like literally the Iblis fights are worse about this. So Solaris isn't even the worst boss in his game, which is a huge accomplishment for a Sonic final boss, to be quite honest. Then you do the whole shebang again with Shadow. Sometimes you do see him block with the shield, so that's not quite consistent. I don't know what happens here. This one, however, is just to show off. If you do rapid fire, then he will always block. So this is the phase where he's vulnerable to Shadow's Chaos Spear, but only the full charged version. You literally cannot do anything if you do not charge the gauge full, and this is the one major flaw of this fight. And this is what makes it really bad, because you do not get the information what you have to do. And also for some reason the Shadow Spears can kind of miss here, which is a bit weird. But now that armor is gone, wonderful, cool, we can go back to Sonic. Not you, it's okay. Silver at this point really only exists to fly around, pick up the projectiles so that you can't get hit, and make sure that you can always recharge the rings of the other hedgehogs. He's quite good at that. I do appreciate it, and I also appreciate that you do have a bit of a grace period before and after switching. So your rings will drain. This is what killed me the first time, but you are invincible to Solaris's attacks after you press the switch button. So that's good. And now I can go hog wild with Sonic because I got plenty more rings here and I destroyed the armor. And now I'm making sure that I can actually survive. And I'm also trying something else, which I also didn't know about the first time I played this. Yeah, now that all of the armor is gone, he's actually vulnerable to all of the hedgehogs. Still not Shadow's normal Chaos Spears, but the charged version, oh, absolutely no problem. And because this always hits and just homes in on there and you can keep dodging, it is by far the best character to use. So you will always want to use Shadow here. However,
is it over? No, it's not over yet. I guess it's not gonna be that easy.
there is a phase 2. But of course it has to be, because now the cool music kicks in, the best version of his world, of course. This is Solaris just going completely hog wild. Like, he is just firing on all cylinders, and this is where a lot of the chaos of this fight comes in, and where it's like, oh yeah, this is still a Sonic final boss. It makes little sense, there's just a lot going on. And it's also a bit of a visual and just conveyance mess. However, the good thing about this is that Shadow still shreds it, because the core is exposed, you know, it's like, wow, there's a core, there was a core in the phase before, but you know, I digress. And it is always vulnerable to all the hedgehogs now, but only while Solaris is firing its laser. You will note that this isn't entirely true, because you will often see the laser fire and it still doesn't take any damage. But I've talked to the speedrunners about it, and they're like, yeah, it's a bit of a mess. It's random when it fires, and it's random how long it's vulnerable in a sense. Yeah? Generally, the idea is that you can only attack it when the laser fires. Problem is, often the laser firing's already done by the time Sonic or any of the projectiles you fire reach the core. So it's very hard to go from, oh yeah, it's actually vulnerable because the laser is firing, to, oh, I can actually damage it now. You know, this is not very clear. And no, firing single shots still doesn't do anything regardless of if the laser is firing or not. One thing that is, however, somewhat consistent, you can fly around Solaris in a circle, and it will always try to face you. When it stops, it starts to go into its laser phase, and this is when it is becoming vulnerable. So this is something where you can kind of gauge, oh okay, now this makes sense, but it doesn't really work. But at some point you just keep firing, and the bar is going down, the reasonable pace, and you're like, it's good enough, it's fine. And this is all you have to do for an S rank, by the way. This is a very, very easy S rank to get, as you will see at the end. So if you want to use this as a tutorial, just go hog wild on this final phase. It's fine. Like, if you watch the speedrun of this, the world record just like holds up and to the left so that doesn't get hit by projectiles, as Shadow of course, and spams all the buttons. That's basically what you have to do. If you're playing casually, watch out for your ring count. And as Solaris' health is going down, also watch out for the shenanigans that it gets up to, because it can actually just start casting a completely insane laser inferno at some point, as you're going to see, which is pretty fun to watch. Is it fun to play against? I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're just zooming around all the time. With Shadow, please use Shadow for this, you will save yourself a lot of trouble. It is kind of fun though that at this point you can just use anybody and just smash into it. It's kind of cool. Here, I said it, this is kind of a cool boss, especially in comparison to some of the others, eh? And that is all I have to say about this. So, usually I use the end credits to kind of summarize the Let's Play a bit, but this time those are always in a separate video, so we'll jump to their end towards the end of this video, don't be confused. While Shadow beats up this helplessly flailing thing, a few words. First of all, we're not done. There is still Silver and Shadow hard modes to go, as well as the DLC, but I figure some people will tune out after the main game, much like many won't have played 06 beyond reaching the ending once, if you're even close to that far, and that is okay. So the main question is probably, do I still enjoy this game? Or did all the failures while recording, all the struggling with the bugs, and just the sheer effort of such a long Let's Play grind me down? Absolutely not. I still look forward to every session. Even Silver, whose hard mode gameplay is already recorded. If you're observant later, you'll see that I started on the first 3 even before making this video, was not nearly as much of a chore as one might think. Figuring out how this wonderfully flawed thing ticks was half the fun, and the other half is indeed putting that knowledge to use. I've said it many times, but it bears repeating. There is nothing worse in my mind than a mediocre game. Anything that is mostly boring or tedious or even just fine is completely uninteresting to me. That encompasses lots of games with gameplay that is serviceable but forgettable, and then coast on presentation and atmosphere, qualities that are more than enough for most people, but sadly not for me. I know that I'm probably a bit of an outlier, but this game, ugly as sin, terrible story, engine jankier than a PS1 era license game, is so much more worth of my time than the latest AAA open world game. It is not a perspective I expect everybody to get, but I hope that my sheer enthusiasm through most of this has at least allowed you to understand it a bit better. And I know at least one of my viewers did get the itch to replay this game and found it fun. This was not my most popular Let's Play, and the attention it got is definitely inversely correlated to the effort I put into it, but for this alone it was worth it. Video games should be fun, and even the worst of them can be exactly that. And if you still couldn't imagine having fun with this, I hope you at least had fun watching. I would appreciate it if you gave my numbers a little boost, for the rest of this and the next project. Thank you very much for that, and as always, for your attention.